You wore that to Mom's funeral? My sister's voice sliced through the church hall, sharp enough to turn heads. Her diamond bracelet caught the light as she gestured at my simple black dress. I know times are tough, but couldn't you at least try? I smoothed the fabric, hiding my smile. 3 things she didn't know. I designed this dress. I owned the brand on her feet. And the company that terminated her contract an hour ago, that was mine too. The morning of Mom's funeral arrived gray and cold over Los Angeles. I stood before the mirror in my childhood bedroom, one of the few rooms Dad hadn't renovated in his relentless pursuit of modern living, and zipped up my dress. Black crepe, minimal lines, no embellishments. To most people, it looked like something from a department store. To anyone who truly understood fashion, it was $30,000 of wearable art. But my family had never understood what I did. The church was already half full when I arrived in my 10-year-old Prius, parking between Blake's leased Mercedes and Rachel's borrowed Porsche. Through the tall windows, I could see them holding court, accepting condolences like royalty receiving subjects. Dad stood near the altar in his outdated suit. Blake kept checking his phone between handshakes, probably monitoring whatever financial disaster he was juggling at the bank this week. And Rachel posed near the flowers in a cocktail dress that cost more than most people's rent. I slipped through the side entrance, hoping to avoid the reception line, but Aunt Martha caught me immediately. Her eyes did that quick scan wealthy relatives perfect by age 40, calculating my worth down to the last dollar. She asked about my little boutique with barely concealed pity, then suggested I connect with her neighbor's daughter, who'd just opened an Etsy shop. I smiled the smile I'd perfected over 15 years of family gatherings and thanked her for being thoughtful. The service itself was beautiful if you liked orchestrated grief. Mom would have hated it. The enormous arrangements, the string quartet, the pastor who'd met her exactly twice droning on about her dedication to family. Mom had been dedicated to her craft, to the small boutique she'd run for 30 years, teaching women that elegance wasn't about labels, but about understanding who you were. It was during the reception that things truly began. Rachel's voice carried across the hall. She stood surrounded by her usual quartet of followers, women who thought proximity to a model made them influential. She told them how brave I was, keeping Mom's little shop running, though wouldn't it be easier to just work retail somewhere? Someone mentioned Nordstrom had excellent benefits. Then Rachel delivered the blow she'd clearly rehearsed. She gestured at my dress with her manicured nails, the gel tips I noticed because she used to afford acrylics. She said she couldn't believe I'd worn that to Mom's funeral, that times were tough for me, but couldn't I have at least tried? Mom deserved better than off the rack. The quartet laughed appropriately. Blake appeared at Rachel's shoulder, ever the opportunist. He used my childhood nickname I'd specifically asked him to stop using when I turned 30. He offered to lend me money for something appropriate next time, said we were family after all. Then he warmed to his role as successful older brother, suggesting he could get me a small business loan. The rates would be brutal given my situation, but it might keep me afloat a few more months. Dad finally joined the circle, playing patriarch even as I noticed his cufflinks were replicas of the ones he'd sold 6 months ago. He said I was doing fine with my hobby, that Mom had left me that space free and clear, and sometimes that was enough for some people. Some people. As if I were a different species, content with less, ambitious for nothing. The assumptions rolled over me like old friends. The Prius I drove to family events because the Bentley would raise questions. The studio apartment that was actually my private floor at the Meridian Towers. The little boutique that served as my personal laboratory while I'd built an empire on Mom's foundation. Standing there in the church where Mom had taught Sunday school. Surrounded by people who thought they knew my worth down to the last cent, I made a decision. Not from anger. I'd moved past that years ago. Not even from hurt, their opinions had stopped mattering. But from cold, clear recognition that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for people is show them exactly who they are when the masks come off. My phone buzzed. A message from my assistant about the Valderi contract renewal. Perfect timing. I excused myself, typed a quick response, and returned to find Rachel telling everyone about her upcoming campaign as the new face of the brand. The creative director loved her, she said. She embodied their woman. Successful, sophisticated, uncompromising. I thought about the email I'd just sent, about the meeting tomorrow where that same director would explain the brand was moving in a new direction, about the bills piling up in Rachel's Calabasas apartment that she thought no one knew about. I raised my paper cup in a toast. To new directions, I said. She missed the irony entirely. They all did. The next morning, I returned to Mom's boutique on Cypress Avenue. To everyone else, it looked exactly as it had for 30 years, a modest storefront squeezed between a dry cleaner and a vintage bookshop. The faded sign still hung above the door. What they didn't know was that I'd purchased the entire block 6 years ago through one of my holding companies. Inside, morning light filtered through the windows, catching dust particles above racks of carefully curated pieces. Mom had possessed an extraordinary eye, able to spot potential in a garment the way others recognized masterpieces in galleries. I'd learned at her knee, watching her transform women with understanding, how clothes could be armor or wings, depending on what you needed. My phone buzzed with the family group chat Dad had created after Mom's diagnosis. He'd named it Grief Support, though it functioned more as a bulletin board for their performances of success. Blake posted about crushing his quarterly review, claiming Mom would be proud. Rachel announced she was on set for the Valder shoot, thinking of everyone. Dad mentioned closing the Steinberg deal, saying Mom always believed persistence pays. Lies layered upon lies. Blake's bank was under federal investigation for predatory lending. Rachel wasn't on any set. Valderi had suspended her contract 3 days ago, though she hadn't gotten the termination notice yet. Dad's Steinberg deal was dead. I'd had my lawyers kill it last week when I discovered it involved Mom's memorial fund as collateral. I set my phone aside and walked through the boutique, running my fingers along the fabrics. In the back office, hidden behind a panel Mom had installed, lay the real heart of the space. My first design studio, where E. Morgan Atelier had been born 15 years ago, while my family thought I was playing shopkeeper. My assistant Alyssa called as I was examining a bolt of Italian wool Mom had stored for something special. She had the reports I'd requested. Blake's bank was facing a liquidity crisis, the federal investigation expanding. His personal assets were leveraged at 340% of their value. Dad's real estate holdings were in foreclosure proceedings on 3 properties. He'd been using creative financing to hide the losses, but the house of cards was collapsing. Timeline: 6 to 8 weeks before it became public. And Rachel was living on maxed credit cards. Her apartment lease ended next month, and she didn't have the funds for renewal. The Valderi termination would be official tomorrow. No other agencies were showing interest. I closed my eyes, seeing my baby sister at 5, parading around in Mom's heels, declaring she'd be famous someday. She'd gotten her wish, Instagram famous, which in Los Angeles counted for something until the bills came due. Alyssa continued. They'd been approaching my business contacts. Blake had reached out to Nathan Xian about a family investment opportunity. Rachel had contacted 3 of my brand ambassadors, suggesting she could get them discounts. Dad had been name-dropping me to potential investors, implying a connection to Morgan Group without saying it outright. Now that was interesting. They'd spent years dismissing my work. Yet when desperate, they tried to trade on a connection they didn't even know they had. I instructed Alyssa to send the full files and move forward with the plans we'd discussed. After ending the call, I spent another hour cataloging pieces for donation to fashion students. Mom would have wanted that. Memories surfaced. Rachel at 16, sneering at my decision to skip college for playing with clothes. Blake at his MBA graduation, joking that at least one sibling had ambition. Dad, just last year, suggesting I sell the boutique and do something real with my life. That evening I stood on my private terrace at Meridian Towers, looking out over the city lights. Somewhere out there my family was maintaining their facades, unaware that the foundations were crumbling. Blake would discover the federal audit tomorrow. Dad would get the foreclosure notices by the end of the week. Rachel would wake to an email that would shatter her carefully curated image. I could stop it all with a few phone calls. Wire transfers to cover their debts. A word to the right people to make their problems disappear. It would cost me barely a fraction of what I'd earned last quarter. But that would require them seeing me. Really seeing me. And in 20 years, they'd never managed that. My phone rang, an unknown number, but I recognized the prefix. The federal building downtown. Agent Davies from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division wanted to know if I had information relevant to their investigation into Western Pacific Bank. Blake's bank, where he'd so proudly become regional manager, never questioning why they'd promoted him so quickly. As the agent outlined their case, fraud, predatory lending, money laundering, I realized my brother wasn't just arrogant. He was complicit. I told the agent to send the formal request. My lawyers would review it. After hanging up, I poured myself wine. My family's illusions weren't just crumbling. They were about to explode. And at the center of it all, they'd find me. Not the version they'd invented, poor, struggling, pitiable, but the real one. The one they'd never bothered to see. Tomorrow, the first dominoes would fall. The Haven-Mark Tower rose 42 floors above Los Angeles, its glass and steel facade catching morning sun in sheets of gold. Most people knew it as prime commercial real estate. What they didn't know was that floors 35 through 38 belonged entirely to Morgan Group, accessible only by private elevator, hidden behind a facade of shell companies. I arrived at 7 using the executive entrance. My Bentley slid into its reserved spot between the CFO's Maserati and the head of International Development's Tesla. The private elevator required both biometric scan and voice recognition. As the floors counted upward, I transformed. By the time the doors opened on the executive floor, I was E. Morgan, architect of a fashion empire that spanned continents. The morning meeting began with acquisitions. The Valderi transition was proceeding smoothly. Their board had been grateful for the buyout. They'd been hemorrhaging money faster than they'd admitted publicly. We'd retained the senior designers who showed promise and released all model contracts except 3 who fit our new brand direction. Rachel hadn't been one of them. The market response was positive, stock up 4% in overnight trading. The fashion press was calling it a strategic coup. Moving on to European expansion, my team reported the Milan flagship was ahead of schedule, Paris on track for September. Then they hesitated. London had hit a snag with the Mayfair location. The property owner was Gerald Morgan. The room went still. My executive team didn't know he was my father. To them, he was simply another over-leveraged real estate speculator who happened to own a building we wanted. I instructed them to double our offer, but structure it through the Cayman subsidiary. Make it clear this was our final proposal. If he refused, we'd walk and leak our withdrawal to the press. The property would be worthless without an anchor tenant of our caliber. Throughout the meeting, I partitioned my mind, CEO in the foreground, daughter watching her father's empire crumble in the background. My phone, set to silent, lit up with messages. Blake needed a lawyer and asked if I knew anyone cheap. Rachel demanded to know why I wasn't answering, claiming it was life or death. Dad insisted the family needed to stick together because Blake was being railroaded. I archived them all, without responding. Let them stew in the uncertainty they'd so casually inflicted on others over the years. Between spreadsheets and strategy sessions, I monitored my family's continued meltdown through various feeds. Blake had discovered the FBI freeze when his mortgage payment bounced. The panic in his texts to Dad was palpable. Dad's response was typically self-absorbed. He told Blake to handle it because he had his own problems. Rachel had gone silent after getting the termination notice, but her credit card activity told its own story. 3 declined charges at her usual breakfast spot. A failed attempt to book a panic session with her therapist. An Uber ride to Dad's house. They were converging, drawn together by crisis as they'd never been by success. The family that had stood apart at Mom's funeral, each isolated in their bubble of perceived superiority, would huddle together now in shared desperation. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I recognized Rachel's secondary cell, the one she thought no one knew about. She asked if we could talk, claimed she was downtown for a meeting, and wanted to grab lunch. The lie came so easily to her. No mention of her terminated contract, her maxed credit cards, her desperate attempt to meet the mysterious E. Morgan who just acquired the brand she'd pinned her future on. I told her I was at the boutique doing inventory. The disappointment in her voice was palpable when she suggested dinner instead, saying she really needed to talk. I watched her through the security feeds, standing 50 feet below me, defeat in every line of her body. She had no idea her big sister had been close enough to help but was choosing not to. Our Tokyo office reported unusual activity. Someone was trying to hack into our systems, specifically targeting information about company ownership. The attacks were amateur but persistent, coming from multiple IPs traced back to Southern California. Blake. My brother was trying to understand why his bank had been so eager to finance certain fashion industry ventures now under scrutiny. I instructed the team to let him waste his energy, but document everything. The FBI might find it interesting that he was attempting corporate espionage while under federal investigation. As the day wore on, the walls continued closing in. Dad's final loan rejection came through at 3:47. Blake's assets were frozen completely by 4:15. And Rachel pawned her last piece of valuable jewelry, a Cartier watch I'd given her for her 21st birthday. They were drowning, and I held all the life preservers. Everything was ready. Tomorrow they would see. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor to the boutique. Through the security feeds, I watched Dad's Mercedes pull up outside. He sat in the driver's seat for 5 minutes, pride warring with desperation on his face, before finally emerging. I met him upstairs, playing the role he expected. Elise in a simple cardigan organizing inventory, looking up with mild surprise when the door chimed. He admitted he was in a bind, a temporary cash flow issue, and wondered if I might have any savings to spare. He needed $200,000 as a loan, naturally, with interest. I tilted my head, asking how much. When he named the sum, I could picture the calculations in his head. Surely even I, with my pathetic little shop, must have saved something over the years. I told him the boutique barely broke even. He knew that. His face tightened. He insisted I must have something set aside, that Mom must have left me something. I interrupted gently, reminding him she'd left me the shop, which, as he'd pointed out many times, was more burden than asset. He stood abruptly, anger flashing before he controlled it. At the door, he paused, mentioning that Blake was in real trouble, that the FBI had come to his house that morning, and Rachel had lost the Valderi contract. She was talking about moving back home. He stared at me, and for a moment I thought he might actually see me, see the careful neutrality, see the boutique that was so much more than it appeared, see the daughter he dismissed for 20 years. But the moment passed. His shoulders slumped as he left. That evening I called a family meeting. Not at Dad's house or the boutique, but at Morgan Group headquarters. I instructed Alyssa to send the invitations from my corporate email, signed E. Morgan, requesting their presence to discuss potential opportunities. They came separately, each believing they were meeting a mysterious benefactor who might solve their problems. Dad arrived first, then Blake with his lawyer, finally Rachel wearing borrowed designer pieces and carrying desperation like a weight. The conference room was simple, clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. They sat at the table, exchanging confused glances, wondering why they'd been summoned together. I entered last, walked past them to the head of the table, sat down, waited for recognition to dawn. Rachel spoke first, asking what I was doing here. Then her eyes widened. She asked if I worked for E. Morgan. I told her I was E. Morgan. The silence that followed was absolute. Blake tried to laugh, suggesting this was some kind of joke. Dad simply stared, his face cycling through disbelief, confusion, and finally something that might have been fear. I explained calmly, methodically. The boutique had been my laboratory. Every collection for the past 15 years had started there. The underground floors, the design teams, the 63 global locations, all of it built while they'd pitted me for clinging to Mom's hobby. Rachel interrupted, asking why I'd fired her. Her voice broke on the last word. I told her she'd fired herself, that her behavior had become a liability to the brand. But I'd included a transition package if she was willing to work for it. Real work, not Instagram poses. We had positions in production, in quality control, in logistics. Places where she could learn what it meant to build something instead of just wearing it. I turned to Blake, explaining that the FBI had their evidence regardless of my involvement. But I could provide character testimony if he cooperated fully with the investigation and made restitution to the families his bank had defrauded. And Dad, I offered to purchase his failing properties at fair market value and hire him as a consultant for our real estate acquisitions. If he could admit he'd been wrong about me, about Mom's work, about what actually mattered. The choice was theirs. I wouldn't destroy them. They'd already done that to themselves. But I could offer a way forward if they were willing to see me, really see me, for the first time in 20 years. Rachel started crying. Not the performative tears she used for social media, but real, broken sobs. She apologized, said she'd been terrible, that she didn't deserve help. I agreed. She didn't deserve it. But Mom would have wanted me to offer it anyway. 3 months later, I stood in Mom's boutique on a Saturday morning, sunlight streaming through the windows. The space looked exactly as it always had, modest, timeless, quietly dignified. But everything had changed. Rachel worked in the back, learning pattern making from one of my senior technicians. She'd started in the warehouse, inventory, and shipping before asking to learn design. She arrived early now, left late, her hands developing calluses from handling fabric and tools. The Instagram account she'd once obsessed over sat dormant. She'd told me last week she didn't miss it. Through the boutique's back office, I could hear her asking questions about seam construction, her voice carrying none of the performative confidence it once had. Just genuine curiosity and the humility that comes from starting over. Blake had cooperated fully with the federal investigation. His testimony had been crucial in dismantling the bank's predatory lending operation. He'd lost everything: the house, the car, the illusion of success, but he'd helped 37 families get restitution. He worked now as a financial literacy instructor for a nonprofit, teaching the same communities his bank had targeted how to protect themselves from schemes like his. Last month, he'd called to thank me for the character testimony I'd provided. His voice had been different, quieter, stripped of bravado. He'd apologized for the years of condescension, admitted he'd never actually looked at what I was building, had been too busy constructing his own facade to see anything real. Dad had been the hardest. Pride was a difficult thing to surrender, especially for a man who'd built his identity on being the patriarch, the success, the one who knew better. But he'd accepted my offer eventually. He consulted now on our real estate acquisitions, using his decades of experience, without the pressure of maintaining an empire he couldn't afford. He came by the boutique sometimes just to talk. We'd started having coffee together on Sundays, conversations that began stiffly but gradually found their rhythm. Last week he'd asked about Mom, about what she'd taught me, about the years he'd missed by not paying attention. There had been tears, his, not mine. An apology that came too late to change the past but arrived in time to build something new. The family group chat still existed, but the messages had changed. Rachel posted photos of fabric samples, asking for opinions. Blake shared articles about financial justice. Dad sent reminders about Sunday coffee. They'd stopped performing and started communicating. I walked through the boutique, running my fingers along a bolt of silk Mom had chosen years ago. The underground empire continued thriving, 65 locations now, with Paris opening next month. But I spent more time here lately, in this small space where it all began, where Mom had taught me that true elegance came from understanding who you were and having the courage to build from that truth. Through the window, I watched people passing on the street. Ordinary lives, ordinary struggles, ordinary triumphs. I'd once thought success meant proving them wrong, showing them what they'd missed, making them see. But Mom had known better. Success wasn't about their eyes, it was about my own. About building something meaningful, staying true to craft, about offering help without requiring gratitude, about moving forward without needing revenge. My phone buzzed. Alyssa, asking about the Tokyo expansion timeline. I typed a quick response, then set the phone aside. Business could wait. Rachel would be finishing her lesson soon, and we'd promised to have lunch together. Real conversation, not performance. Sister to sister, learning who we actually were instead of who we'd pretended to be. I didn't destroy them. They'd been destroying themselves long before I entered the picture. I'd simply held up a mirror and offered a choice: keep pretending or start building something real. They'd chosen to build.
And that was enough.
In the boutique where Mom had taught me everything that mattered, I finally understood her last lesson. The best revenge isn't about making them suffer. It's about becoming so completely yourself that their opinions cease to matter. And if you're strong enough, offering them the chance to do the same. I was free. And slowly so were they.